been really important. We reorganized the financial offices in the city to create more accountability with the treasurer, the collector's office, the auditor's office, and the assessors now answering to a single financial manager. I bargained with police and fire to come out of civil service, which has allowed us to hire more effectively. And in fact, we've just put on 7 new police officers. 6 are in the academy and 1 is now actually out on the street training. We had significant trouble hiring police officers and firefighters because of the extremely slow nature of civil service. Even during those tough times, we bargained with our unions, collective bargaining with our unions to help reduce and health costs, a change in cost sharing, but also a change in the kind of plans we have, and we moved all our retirees onto Medicare, which we had been paying for anyway, and the federal government was keeping that money. Now they're spending it on our retirees. Those kinds of actions actually save the city. Our healthcare costs are about half the state average in terms of the increase over the last number of years. Looking forward, the big issue that now that we have, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, I hope, in terms of this recession, the big issue is what's going to happen with growth and development in our community. Last May, I announced the start of the comprehensive planning process called Sustainable Northampton. We had over 300 people participate in the first phase of that process a couple weeks ago, and I hope that that process continues through in the spring. And I hope that all the people in this room participate, because I want to hear from not just those people who come to meetings, but those who don't. We're trying to figure out how to get you all to be involved. It's critical for the community's future. I look forward to talking about lots of issues tonight, and I'm excited about being here. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now start the questioning. First off, Chris Collins from a reporter from the WHMP.
I'm asking Mr. Feld, right?
Either one.
Rick, you most recently served, as you mentioned, as Executive Director of HCAC. It's a job that you took right before that organization essentially imploded. Obviously, you weren't around when the financial problems that hit HCAC happened, but the fact that you were the Executive Director at the end of that organization may cause some people to question your qualifications to run the city. How do you respond to those questions?
By telling people the truth that I know. The unfortunate thing is that there's information that a number of people never had privy to. So the best I can do is be able to say that when I started the organization, when I started working at the organization as interim executive director, the departing administrators gave me one set of information. And then within a month, I was learning a whole different set of information that indicated that the financial health of the organization was dramatically worse than we had been told. And you know, it's hard to characterize that, but it appears as if that they knew, some of those people knew things that they weren't sharing with the rest of the community, they weren't sharing with their own board, and they certainly weren't sharing with their fellow managers and employees. So I try to tell people exactly what happened and what we were faced with, and go on to say that we ended up having a choice, and our choice was to try to save it, which we discovered we couldn't do, or at least make sure that the services got saved and they got distributed around to other agencies, so that the 7,000 families and households would continue to get uninterrupted services. And I think we did as well as we could under those circumstances.
If you want, you can rebuttal that, but...
The only thing I'd say is that I've said before in debates when I asked about HCAC that I don't see that as particularly relevant to this race. Mr. Feldman was hired late in the game there. And so I don't particularly think it's relevant. My job as the mayor in the city, and I worked with Mr. Feldman on this, was to identify whether or not there were places in the state that we could try to find money, in the absence of being able to find money at the state level, to try to shepherd those programs to new homes, and to try to relocate the CAP money somewhere to keep it in Hampshire County, and I worked with other local elected officials on that issue. But as I said, Mr. Feldman came in late to that, and I don't see that as particularly relevant moving forward.
Do you have your second question?
Well, I think we have to go to Dan.
Yeah, that's good.
That's right, Chelsea. He's
Okay.
rotates around, so
Okay.
Is this for Mr. Feldman then?
that's for the mayor.
Mayor.
Mayor, 150 area residents from the 181st Engineering Battalion, Army National Guard in Florence left for Iraq last night. Some of them constituents, and most recently the American death toll in Iraq has reached 2,000. Luckily, American involvement in Iraq is not your responsibility as mayor. Having said that, what do you think is the role of a local mayor in times of war, if any?
You know, that's an interesting question, Dan, and the issues of this war have been somewhat divisive in this community. There's very strong held positions, but I think one position that everybody holds in this community is that they want to support those people who are overseas. It's unfortunate that state government doesn't notify us when those troop movements happen, because I am grateful for people who are willing to serve the country, whatever my position is on the war. They're making a sacrifice for the country. If there's any support that the community can give on the local level, that's what I think the correct role is. And I think it's not necessarily our role to judge the individual motives of those individual soldiers, although many of us have positions on the war itself.
Rebuttal?
Well, not exactly rebuttal. I don't think there's much to rebut, so much as to add. I was an Army brat, so I grew up in the military. And I guess what I would add to that is that it's important for us to distinguish between the soldiers and the men and women who are sent into battle or to stations, who, as the mayor said, we have to provide the support to them and their families. At the same time, be able to recognize that because of that war, vast amount of national and federal resources don't come to municipalities anymore. Were it not for some of that adventurism, we might have more resources for domestic uses.
Chris Collins? Oh, sorry. Fred Contra.
Mr. Feldman, do you feel that panhandling and hanging out is getting out of hand downtown? And if so, what would you do about it, if anything?
I'd like to distinguish, I don't know, by panhandling and hanging out.
Gathering on the public places. Loitering.
Well, let's see. The adults who are the panhandlers, hanging out in town, from what I've learned from the police, a vast majority of those people are not even from our city, and they've come to Northampton because it's a good place to pick up some cash, and Northampton residents seem to be willing to depart with their money, so we keep a lot of panhandlers in business. And I think it is a problem. A number of businesses and offices, people have their offices and upstairs in those buildings, complain about entrance and exit from the buildings for themselves and for their customers. Hanging out sounds like, that sounds a little different. And I think downtowns are for hanging out. For residents, it's the opportunity to socialize, meet friends, be able to relax, walk around town. If there's things for people to do and not feeling like they're hanging out because they're lost, but because it's a fun thing to do and they're enjoying downtown, then I don't think hanging out is. I hope I'm not making too much of that distinction, so I'm a little.
I'm talking about just kind of gathering on the sidewalk and staying there all day.
I still would make the distinction, you know, if it's youth that you're talking about, then, you know, my issue is that the city needs to continually find things for people to do that are fun for them and entertaining for them, and if hanging out on the street is an expression of the fact that we're not doing enough for them, then I think there's work for us to do. For the adults who are hanging out and panhandling or vagrancy, that's a problem.
Thank you.
And what would you do about it? Mayor?
So I'm going to continue to add to this.
Well, that was part of my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Well,
He can appeal to you for a follow-up.
Oh, okay.
It's up to the moderator, it's up to the moderator to determine whether follow-ups is needed, that's all. I'm sorry.
sure,
Go.
go ahead.
Go ahead. So what do I have here? A minute, 2 minutes?
Another minute. Yeah.
Another minute. Okay. So what would I do about it? I'd like to get the store owners, citizens, and police, and some local officials together as sort of a task force and say, what do we do about the panhandler side of this problem and the vagrancy side of this problem, and find out what kinds of solutions we can employ. I understand that there's issues about First Amendment rights. There's all kinds of protections that people have. But nonetheless, I think that there's things that we can do that are creative to move people along and not have them cause problems for other people.
Rebecca?
Now, this is an interesting problem. It comes and goes in the city of Northampton. It came up, I think, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, and then it went away, and it's come back again. There are some significant First Amendment issues. It's very difficult to distinguish, constitutionally between the person who asks you for money to do whatever they want with it, and the kids who are downtown with cans who are raising money for Little League. So it creates a real constitutional problem that we have to be very, very aware of. We have sent out each year, and we'll be sending it out again, a notice reminding merchants that they have the absolute right to ask people to get out of their doorway if they're blocking the doorway. And they have the absolute right to ask people to move on if they're blocking access on the street. And the police will enforce that. But we have to be careful about the First Amendment issues. You know, the panhandlers come here because this is a place where people give them money. We try to redirect that money into cans in the stores to buy food vouchers with some moderate success. But anybody who wants food in the city can get it at the homeless
Thank you. Now, Kayla, do you have a question?
The mic.
Rick, I have a simple question, but an important one. Why do you want to be mayor?
It's not so simple, but you're right, it's very important. I feel that there's a lot of things that haven't been accomplished that should have been accomplished. I was a strong advocate for economic development as a way to expand our tax base a number of years ago. I think there's things that the city should be engaged in and should have been engaged in quite a number of years ago in economic development, in business support, in open space protection. And I feel that we've become much more of a crisis-oriented, crisis-driven government, that the decisions that we make lack a kind of planning and integration that gets us to where we need to get to. And that includes things like not getting things accomplished on time. Admittedly, some of this stuff goes back a number of years. You know, the water treatment plant was an issue that came up back in the 90s. It's almost 15 years later, and it's going to cost us a phenomenal amount of more money simply because we kept delaying it. So I think there's things that we need to do that I bring to city government that will help us plan better, integrate our concepts better, be able to be more proactive, anticipate problems, and at the same time be accountable the way I like to be accountable. I want to be very transparent in my operations and as a manager, and make sure that we embrace people fully in government to solve these problems.
Rebecca?
I get to answer the same question, right? Why do I want to be mayor? And I've been mayor now for 6 years, and it's a job that's just incredible, especially when you're the mayor of the city of Northampton. This is a great city with active and engaged and involved people, and it's to be able to work together with the people in the city to make change has been wonderful for me. And I believe in accountability as well. And the wonderful thing about democracy is, unlike the town manager form of government, every 2 years you get to decide who's going to run the city. And the best accountability I know about is democracy. So I think it's great that we're having these kind of debates to talk about issues. Mr. Feldman brought up a number of issues that I hope you have a chance to address, but there's a lot of issues I want to work on. A comprehensive plan, working with our police and fire to fulfill this promise of coming out of civil service. We have more reorganization to do in city government, and I've been working hard at the state level with our state affiliation with the Mass Municipal Association to fundamentally change the relationship cities and towns have with state government, and I'd like to continue that work.
Chris?
I know this is a youth commission forum, but I'm going to ask a question about the senior center. In March, the city will break ground on a new senior center over by the Salvo House. Last week, the city council approved a $3.9 million bond to build that center. Of that, $1.4 million will come out of the general fund. Now, you made reference in your opening statement, Mayor, to the $1.7 million override that the voters rejected last year. A year after that rejection, we now have $1.4 million to take out of the general fund to build a new senior center. There may be some voters that are confused at how we get to going from an override 1 year to being able to spend $1.4 million in the senior center the next year. Could you explain?
I'm glad you asked that question. It's not $1.4 million in 1 year. That's the first and very important point. When I came in, I made a commitment to look at our capital needs over the long run. Work together with the Capital Improvements Committee, asked them to tell me what the correct amount in our budget as a percentage of our total budget should be in debt service for long-term capital improvement. The goal really is 5%. We held at 1.6% even during the most difficult periods of time in terms of the budget cuts. That $1.4 million is within that 1.6% cap. And as we retire old debt for instance of the old Bridge Street school bonds or the Leeds school bonds or the roof at Smith School, that leaves capacity under that cap which we can apply to new debt, including the senior center. Now, we authorized that bond because we want to get going before costs escalate. It took the committee a while to land on a site, and we're still committed. I'm still committed to using CDBG for a significant portion of the project. We may end up using more CDBG. We are going to continue to look for outside grants for the rest of that project, but in order to keep moving in municipal finance, you have to say that you're willing to put all of the money on the table in order to go out, hire the architects, and start the work that needs to be done. That $1.4 billion is not within 1 year. It's over a 20-year period in the bond.
Thank you. Rebecca?
I think left on the table, though, is the rest of the answer to that question, or at least the rest of the question, and that is, did we or didn't we need the override? And there's a number of people who agreed, obviously half the city agreed, pretty close to half the city agreed that we did need an override, and are now wondering the same question: how is it that we needed an override so desperately 1 year, and the next year we have such significant cash reserve? And I'm also confused about that.
I'd like an opportunity to have some rebuttal there.
Go ahead.
Can I get a minute? I looked at the handout that I did when I went around the city and talked to people about the override, and I made it clear that we were going to put aside cash reserves as I handed out this handout. I made it clear that we were going to continue to build the cash reserves, and that the money that we were looking for was to fill the gap that was created by the loss in state aid. And when we didn't pass the override, we made the cuts, but we still had that cash reserve. It's the same cash reserve I was talking about before the override. And it's the same cash reserve that we're continuing trying to build up. The idea that we didn't need the override, I never said in my statements around the override that it was a must-have. I said that we need to have a decision about what kind of city we want to be and what kind of city services that we want to have. And if we felt that we couldn't afford the override, we would need to cut to the level of money that we had to spend. The voters decided, it was half of 44% of the voters that decided by 7 to defeat the override.
Thank you. Now a question from Dan.
Mr. Feldman.
Sure.
Rick, if you, based on what you know and have learned about Mayor Higgins, what do you see as the biggest differences between you and your opponent in terms of the style of leadership you would bring to City Hall?
I'm pondering the question style of leadership because I'm not quite sure what's encompassed in that.
Or maybe leadership qualities?
I think we're both leaders, and I think we both play a role of being key leaders in the community. I think we strike out in different directions or go down different paths in how you implement that kind of sense of leadership. My sense of leadership is to believe that government really should be a facilitator and not the one that provides all the answers. So in approaching government, I like to see that government mobilizes resources from around the community, helps identify problems for those resources to be applied, and brings all of the talents and skills and great ideas in the community to address a problem and solve that problem. So I think the first thing that I would say is very different is that my style will tend to be much more open and embracing of people from very beginning, and it will be much more transparent. I believe that I do a much more complete job at getting information out to people, involving people, encouraging them to be leaders, and encouraging them to be decision makers. And finally, I think that I solve problems today with an eye to the future. So when I talk about integration, I'm talking about how pieces fit together, and I'm also thinking about how pieces contribute to a foundation for tomorrow. So my style of leadership is to solve the immediate problem in the context of what will that do for us the next day.
Rebuttal?
This is a hard question. Rick's right. We both have leadership styles, and they obviously are different. People here in the city know what my leadership style is, for better or for worse. I have a record that I've talked about on the campaign trail, and that's embedded in sort of everything I've done for the last 6 years. On the issue, but I would like to address the issue of transparency. I think if Mr. Feldman wins the election, he'll find out that there's not much that can be hidden with these guys around. The newspaper does, I wish they did a better job, but they do a pretty good job of telling people what's going on. I spent a lot of time going around the community talking to people. I put out a budget book every year that has the goals and objectives of every city department, and talks about what they did the previous year and did they meet the goals of the previous year. The budget documents are available for everybody. So I'm a little mystified by this transparency issue. On the leadership issue generally, I'm not going to talk about my opponent's leadership style. That's for him to talk about. You all know what my leadership style is, and you'll judge me on that.
Okay. Question from Fred Contrada.
Mayor Higgins, like a lot of other things in Northampton, the art scene has gotten more upscale in recent years. There's more expensive galleries and higher priced venues. With the lease about to expire for the Center for the Arts, and with the possible loss of the art space at Thorns, are you concerned that the grassroots art scene that gave the city a lot of its character is in danger? And if so, what would you do to sustain it?
Yeah, I actually am concerned about that. I think that's a very important issue. The lease for the Center for the Arts was a 30-year lease. It's not just about to expire. I think it's got a few more years on it, Fred, but it is a concern. The other thing that we don't have in this community is a good black box theater, with the exception sort of the space in Thorns. Terry Anderson in my office has worked on and off with groups of artists who are trying to identify space, and that actually has been a critical issue for the Arts Council, and I've supported their work in that area, and we need to do more. One of the things that I think has really jeopardized the grassroots arts in this community has been the loss of affordable space generally, and affordable housing and affordable rental space. That's something that I've worked on in a significant way during my political career, both as a councilor and now as mayor. And at the state hospital, we hope to be bringing on a significant number of new affordable units. We're going to be preserving the units that will be lost, I hope, by Smith College. And we've worked to try to look at the question of live workspace in the community. Part of the comprehensive plan really needs to look at this arts issue, and we've asked the arts community to play a prominent role in the whole comprehensive planning process. You know, to a certain extent, our success as a community, being in Money Magazine, being named the best small arts community, one of the best small arts community in America, one of the best 25 destinations by Style Magazine, are a blessing and a curse, because they have, I think, created inflated costs here and have made it more difficult for those grassroots artists to actually stay here. And it's an issue that I hope we can work through on the comprehensive plan.
Rebecca?
I guess what I would do is add to that. Certainly, one of the big issues is that artists have increasingly difficult time finding quality workspace, performance space, and living space in the city. And that was one of the energizing factors of Northampton in the quote-unquote early days of its art scene. So we have a lot of work to do in making sure that they have the space that they need, and trying to figure out how to put artists in control of that, either through artist cooperatives or you know, whatever other role they can play as taking that leadership. And I look around the room here and I see the role that arts plays in education, and I'd want to make sure that that's also taken into account, that this very institution contributes mightily to the enthusiasm and energy of arts in Northampton, and that we should find lots of ways to endorse that and support that and fund it.
Thank you. Michaela, do you have a question?
There. Last month, biker Meg Sanders was tragically killed in a biking accident in downtown Northampton. Do you have any plans to make biking on the streets of Northampton safer?
Yeah, that was a tragic accident. Meg Sanders was a young, vibrant person who lived in East Hampton but worked in our community. And in fact, I used to live in the neighborhood that's off Green Street, and often biked to my job at Verde Street School and biked right down that very space that she was biking on. So I had an identification on a number of different levels around that accident. We have an incredibly vibrant bicycle advocacy community here, and I think that that's great. We've worked with them on a number of issues to try to make bicycling safer. Early on, when I was a city councilor, as a matter of fact, we worked with youth in this community from JFK to try to identify sidewalks where kids could ride bikes. And there are sidewalks in this community now, with the exception of downtown Florence and downtown Northampton, that you're allowed to ride the bike on the sidewalk. The bike community feels mixed about that. Is not sure that's the safest things to do, but I tell people if they don't feel safe on the street, that they should know that they can ride on the sidewalk. We need to do more in terms of bike paths. We are a leader in this part of the state in terms of bike paths, but we're continuing to push that and to try to do more. We're going to be connecting to East Hampton. We're going to be bringing the bike path from the Coolidge Bridge, at least as far as King Street, and we're going to continue to push the bike path movement as well. The primary thing I think we need to do is some education on all levels, and that really starts with kids. Safety Village is a place where we do a lot of work in terms of educating kids on bike safety, and I think we probably need to do more in this institution and at the middle school. And the other thing that I have been working on is this safe routes to school idea. We haven't officially called it that, but for instance, we've been plowing the bike path in the winter so kids can actually go to school on the bike path and stay off the roads, either by biking or walking. And we built the first long stretch of sidewalk under my administration that had been done in a long time on Bridge Road to attempt to get kids to school safely to JFK.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that is bicycling on the streets of Northampton is sort of another piece of evidence or an indicator of the kind of planning that we're not doing in Northampton. We have huge amounts of traffic increases, and now we have a large number of bicycle enthusiasts, and I'm not sure that we've planned out our traffic flows and our traffic patterns to accommodate that. That particular accident at that location is in fact a notoriously dangerous location for bicyclists, and you're in in a position where you're very vulnerable to traffic turning right, both into the driveways at Smith College, but also if if the vehicle turns right heading towards Green Street and you're coming down the hill on a bicycle, you don't have a lot of room to move. So there needs to be some more design that goes on there. I think that whole intersection, if it's going to accommodate bicycles, it needs to be designed appropriately, and I don't think it is at this point.
Thank you. So this ends our,
Can I interrupt, actually, because this went a whole lot faster than the plan. And I don't know if the reporters have more questions in them, and I don't know if the candidates are up for another round, but it'd be nice. We have 2-hour tape for crying out loud, so we need to.
Well, how long does the impression workshop actually go?
They've been ongoing for a while, so.
So I can go late if I
You
want.
can go late, you can show up late, but I know that I personally would appreciate maybe another round expanding on this, because I think this debate's very good. I timed this out wrong, my fault. I had actually expected that this would go longer. I can ask that. Questions from the audience? Well,
Questions from the audience would be good.
because we can't mic the audience, so it's a problem, so they won't be able to hear it, but well, how about this? We do have enough time. If we do another round from the questioners, and then we can open up to the floor, but Chelsea's gonna have to repeat the question so it can be, okay?
Okay. Well, we've been here for an hour. We haven't asked a question about education, which is kind of surprising considering how we run a youth commission forum. But as you know, I guess this is going to go to Rick. The mayor is not only the mayor of the city, but also the chair of the school committee. And there are some significant issues surrounding education, most notably the amount of funding for education. About half the city's budget goes to its schools, as it does in most communities. And I guess I'm wondering, as mayor, what will you do to ensure that education is fully funded in the future for Northampton?
I liked a response, actually, that I heard to this question the other night from a candidate for school committee, a guy who I thought was pretty outspoken about saying, let's start with figuring out what we want to accomplish in our schools, and then we'll figure out what it costs and how do we go get the funding for it. And in a way, I don't want to dodge the question, and that's not my point here, but my point is to say, I would want to reverse the question, simply because we're often looking so hard to fund activities and try to come up with the money to go into something without thinking about what comes out on the other side. So my first interest is to make sure that, in fact, the Northampton schools are providing and accomplishing what it is that the people in Northampton and the students in Northampton want out of the schools. The second thing is to try to figure out, well, what's the cost for that? How do you get that outcome? What's the cost for that particular outcome? And then to work with all of the stakeholders. I'd like to see teachers. I'd like to see union members. I'd like to see administrators. I'd like to see parents working together collaboratively to figure out what it is they want in their schools and how they're going to go pay for it. Because if we need taxes, then the way to get tax money for something like education is to be very clear about what's needed and what it's going to accomplish. And I actually do believe that this city would support funding for education once we were very clear about what we needed the funding for specifically and what we wanted to accomplish with it.
rebuttal?
I think the school department does have a clear vision, and the school committee does have a clear vision of the education that they want to provide. I don't think we can fund it. I think the most difficult thing for me has been to see, even though we have funded schools at a higher level than we funded the other departments in the city throughout these cutbacks, we still had to cut back significantly for some services in the schools. We are not given enough money from the state. It's a fundamental issue, and that's why I've gotten so active on the state level. Stan Rosenberg and Peter Kokot agree and have been working on the state level to fundamentally rewrite the Chapter 78 formula to change the way Northampton gets money from the state. Massachusetts is 46th out of 50th in terms of state share of education dollars. That means that only 4 states in the country give more money to give less money to their localities than the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does. We have to change that. And that's why I've gotten so active in the MMA to try to change that.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. One of the things that we did in Northampton to address those issues, Support Our Schools had a spin-off organization called, what we call it, NEAT. And I'm trying to figure out what the acronym stood for, but it had Northampton Education Action Team. And the purpose of NEAT was to have a sort of a citizens bottom-up movement to also work in collaboration with the legislators to increase state funding. And they've been very active on addressing, that specific funding problem. But the other part about that is trying to figure out also, what do we do locally while that's going on? Because it's clear that we can't depend all that well on state funding, at least with the current state administration, and we're not going to get much from the federal side. That seems to be pretty clear. So we need to come up with some inventive solutions locally that might include more collaboration with businesses, more collaboration with other school systems, better integration with Smith Vocational and the high school.
Next question from Dan.
Mayor Higgins, outside of school funding, what do you think the city could do to improve the quality of life for the city's youth, whether they be specific projects such as a new skateboard park or basketball courts, other activities, and how would you go about achieving that?
Okay. The skateboard park is something that's been something we've been struggling for a long time. But we're actually out to bid on the skate park, so I'm very happy about that. That will be a Betts Field, and I think it's going to be great. And I thank the youth who are now adults who helped us get that going. And I know they did it not just for them, but for those that came after, so I appreciate that. There's an earlier question about kids, about people loitering downtown, and the dilemma in the city is that we like people to loiter downtown if they're adults with money. It's tougher when they're kids. And we need to make this city more welcoming to youth, especially, I don't think it's any wonder that kids want to go downtown. All adults want to go downtown. Why shouldn't the kids want to go downtown too and hang around? We got to make sure that they feel welcome and appreciated. Youth Commission has done some work on that, and I think we need to continue to do that. We've had some discussion about teen centers. Some youth think it's a good idea, some youth don't think it's a good idea. There's been attempts in the past to do that, and with mixed success. The other group of adolescents or teens that I worry about is the out-of-school youth, the kids that are in school, who are active in their schools and involved. I think they're going to be okay. I wish that there's things we need to do, but I think they're going to be okay. I spent a significant part of my career working with at-risk kids, including at-risk adolescents, teen parents, and I worry about the out-of-school youth and how we try to keep the services in our community for those kids. There's a significant number of them, and we need to work in the community on that. Often those are the kids who, because of the achievement gap, are no longer in our public school, and we need to continue to serve them even if they're not in our public schools.
In a way, this links back to the arts question for me, and as well as sports and after-school activities. We used to have a pretty robust after-school program. I know we have some recreation fields in the city that aren't being able to be used because we don't have the funds at the moment to take care of them. I think we need to make a concerted effort to make sure that we're actually doing things that give people lots of opportunities and options. I too, as I said earlier, I think hanging out is a great activity, and I certainly loved it when I was able to do that. And the last thing is, I guess I would encourage us to do more in performing arts. I'm a fan of the Warped Tour. I know that it caused a lot of heartache in terms of traffic congestion, and I think we could work better with state police and plan that out and know how to handle ticket sales and know how to handle arrangements so they don't end up with these giant traffic congestions. But I thought it was an absolutely spectacular event, and to my knowledge, there was no trouble at that event.
Fred, do you have a question?
I guess this is for both candidates. Could you describe, in your words, how you think the city has changed in the time you've lived here, and describe what you would like to see it be like 20 years from now?
It's Rick first, actually, it's Rick's turn.
What?
It's Rick's turn first.
How it's changed? Boy, I've had a lot of interaction with Northampton over the years. I've lived here about 25 years, a little less than 25 years, but my first encounter with Northampton was as an undergraduate at UMass in the late 60s, early 70s, and I guess Northampton was at its bottom at that point. And then I came back to Northampton in the mid-70s. I was doing fundraising consulting in the arts, and we were doing a study of artisanry and crafts. Northampton was at the center of that study, and I was just seeing Northampton start to blossom. And then I moved here when it was fully into that renaissance, and the energy level of Northampton and the enthusiasm in Northampton was amazing. New stores opening up, new excitement, people being very inventive, lots of fresh ideas, some of which fell flat, but that's part of invention. You know, you learn by trying things and stumbling and sometimes falling, but it was a very exciting period. And I guess we've arrived at a point now that I'm feeling that wave that we've been riding on for the past number of years, maybe the past 15 years, has crested, and that the energy level and the enthusiasm for creativity and the next step in Northampton has declined a bit, and I'm starting to see a lot more emphasis on, even from the investor's point of view, more emphasis on real estate, speculation. I'm not seeing and not feeling the sense of real excitement and new opportunities that I was experiencing 25 years ago. So I'd like to see that. I'd like to see us take a concerted effort and do what we need to do to turn it around.
So 20 years from now, what would your Northampton look like?
It would be continually robust, continually exciting, that people would see opportunities, young people would want to stay here, they wouldn't feel compelled to have to move away, and it would be affordable and exciting, and there'd be opportunities for people. And I think that's what sustainable economic development is all about. And it has to do with creating wealth, retaining wealth for community benefit. And I think we could do it that way. 20 years from now, this could be a city that everybody always finds exciting and welcoming.
Rebuttal?
How much time do I have on this? 1 minute? Okay. Did you see this as a question for both candidates?
Yeah.
So it seems like this probably should be a 3-minute.
Well, I think actually in fairness, because Rick got an extra minute to respond to the follow-up, that you could have 2 minutes. How's
All
that?
right, 2 minutes.
I don't know why
I'm haggling with Bill Dwight about minutes. I moved here in the late 70s, and I worked as a child care worker for many years. So the Northampton I knew in many ways was the Northampton of families, of young families, many times families who didn't have money. And I worked in that capacity for a long time. I was also, during that time, I was a union organizer for a couple of years. So much of my time when I first moved here was spent with low and moderate income families. And the hardest thing for me about the change for Northampton is that it's become harder and harder for young families to live here. So that's the change I think that is the most difficult, and I think has the seeds of the most trouble for us. Economies and cities and communities stay robust if families can live in them and young people can live in them. So we need to figure out as a community how to be welcoming to young families. That means developing affordable housing. It means developing not just subsidized housing, which is what some people hear here when you say affordable, but I'm talking about housing that's available to people who are working. When I moved to Northampton as a young person, I was working in childcare for 3.5 hours a day, and I was a waitress at the bagel deli. I'll tell you, the tips there were not very good. That's what happens when you deliver things wrapped in paper to people's places. They don't tip very well. But I was able to afford to live in town, and actually to live in town without a car, and to make a good life here. And we need to make that opportunity available. In 20 years, I'd like to see Hospital Hill fully built out as a vibrant neighborhood. More density in downtown, maybe with housing that's more affordable, with a range of apartments, et cetera, in downtown. And I'd like to see perhaps even the same happening in some of our other village centers like Florence. I will add that some of what's going on in Northampton is a natural generational change. The people that began those stores that Mr. Feldman talks about are our age and older. And some of them are thinking about what they want to do in the next phase of their life. We need to have affordable spaces for new young entrepreneurs to come in to build on that legacy here in Northampton.
Great. Michaela, do you have a question?
Yeah. Rick, we're in the 5 college area, so there's a lot of drugs, a lot of drug trafficking all the time. So it's a huge problem in our high school. There's, they do a poll, I think, not a poll, in the 9th and, oh yeah, survey, thank you. 9th and 11th grade, I believe. I took it, and we got the results back, and just kids in this high school specifically, just there's so much drugs, so many, and I was just wondering if you have any plans to reduce that, or are there any plans that you have?
Actually, I'm sorry, this is for the mayor, because I think it was the mayor's question.
You too.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michaela. It's an issue. It's an issue that I brought up at the Youth Commission, and we actually had the health coordinator in to talk about the survey there. I really, this is not just a youth issue, and it's not a city government issue. It's a family issue, and we need to figure out how to involve families in this question, because law enforcement, which is what city government has as one of its tools, really can't do it, and quite frankly, schools can't do it alone either. I don't have good answers for that, and I'm looking for good answers for that, because I think that we are losing kids. You know, this city, it's a struggle in the city. We lose kids to overdoses, to drug driving accidents, and so on, and then it's a real issue. You know, I think it's an area that parents need to step up a little bit more, and there's a I'm not sure that kids always get the message that their parents think that it's not okay to use and abuse drugs or alcohol, and I think that's an important message for kids to get. I'm not a parent, so it may be easier for me to say that because I'm not the one who has to go do it. But I do think it's a really important thing for kids to understand that in society, in our society, if you're abusing drugs and alcohol, you close off choices for yourself, and we need to think together as a community how to have that conversation. I know that your principal has said that the school can't do it alone. We need to think together as a community how to do that. I don't have the answers to that, and I'm willing to work on it.
The saddest thing to me actually is in 1971, the first class of University Without Walls picked this as a theme. So there it is, 30 years ago. There were a group of people at the university saying, what are we to do about the increase of drugs and alcohol in our schools? And here it is, that many years later, and we haven't got an answer, and it's gotten worse. So that's a sad thing, and I think that our culture and our society nationally has kind of stumbled on this issue completely. A contributor to the solution is your asking this question, and you and your peers providing the leadership to your colleagues and to spread the word around that it's not a good thing. It certainly is a family issue as well as a neighborhood issue. You know, it's something that gets dealt with most successfully at the most local level, which is your household, but also peer-to-peer. And the more you and your friends can talk to others and tell them, this isn't the right way to go, the penalty you're going to pay is going to be intense, you can play a very effective role in changing that.
Thank you. Should we open it up to?
Well, we've done this for an hour. Is everyone willing to sit through, say, 6 questions from the audience?
Okay.
Can we handle that? If we can generate 6 questions. Jim's got a question.
For the mayor's, I attended a finance committee meeting start in 2006, and even subsequent to the failure of our Oak Ride last year, we ended up with $2.6 million in free cash. I wondered how that came about.
Is that to me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me answer that question, and I think that Mr. Feldman was alluding to that earlier. Free cash is what's left over at the end of the year in unspent money from budgets. For instance, if we have a couple people leave and we don't spend their salary, that money's left over, coupled with unexpected revenues, the money that we didn't know necessarily was going to come in or came in higher than we thought. So there's a little room to move there every year. We always have some amount of free cash, and we build on it from year to year. So in any given year, it's not growing by $2.6 million, but that's the cumulative amount. I talked at the time of the override about the fact that we were building reserves and we were going to use those reserves as a strategy to get through the hard times, and that the override wouldn't fully fill the amount that we were cut by the state. And we've done that. And part of those reserves were transfers from free cash into the stabilization fund. I want to give George Zimmerman his due. A significant amount of the new free cash that got added was uncollected taxes that he was able to work towards collecting, because we have not too many, but some people in this community who have not paid their taxes. About 99% of the people here pay their taxes on time, and we have 1% who don't. And every day they don't, they accumulate 16% interest. That comes back into free cash. So we had a good year in terms of uncollected. We had some slightly higher revenues, especially in the area of new growth, new buildings, and commercial and residential. And we had some turnbacks from departments because of turnover in those departments. We never take turnbacks from the school department, by the way. We only take it from city departments. We let the school department keep their turnbacks and figure out how to roll it into the next year or to spend it at the end of the year so they can bolster their program.
Rebuttal?
It wasn't clear that there's room for rebuttal. I guess I'll add some comments to taxes in general, whether it is the override or this current debate with the Community Preservation Act tax. I think because of skepticism, cynicism, some of the issues that you're raising and alluding to in that question, the public just in general, I get the feeling that the public in general is saying, I don't want to pay more taxes unless I absolutely know how I'm going to benefit from that. And so on the government side, we have to do a much better job of being able to describe and prove that tax money has the outcome and the impact that people find beneficial. And I think that's a really difficult chore, and I'm not sure we've done it all that well. So that it goes back to the question of why I'm running for mayor. I feel like I would do a better job at that, and I think that that's a major task facing us.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Go ahead.
Higgins, you said that you'd like to see the relationship between cities and towns of Massachusetts and the state government change. Can you please explain how you'd like to see that change?
Can you repeat the question when you...
You couldn't hear.
Oh, okay. If you're a little louder.
We can't hear it to repeat.
Earlier, Mayor Higgins said that you're working towards and would like to see the relationship between cities and towns and the state government change. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about how you'd like to see, what you'd like to see change.
Thanks for the question. I've been working on a group called the Municipal Finance Task Force. That's been a statewide task force put together by the Metro Mayors Coalition, mayors from Eastern Mass, private sector people, including people from the Federal Reserve Bank, Sovereign Bank. The chair of Sovereign Bank was the chair of this committee that's now informally known as the Hamill Committee because his name is John Hamill. And we put together a report called Local Communities at Risk that talks about a lot of the issues that we have here in Northampton and how they're really statewide issues. And we're using this document now to meet with leadership at the State House, at the State Senate. We've met with the governor's staff. Haven't had an opportunity to meet with the governor yet because I think he was in North Carolina or maybe Michigan looking for another job, I think. But we were able to meet with those folks and talk to them about changing the nature of the state-aid relationship. And there are really a couple of key ingredients. One is creating state aid that's reliable and predictable, so that when there was a recession in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, cities and towns got cut more than the loss of revenue on the state level. We should at least have it be cut at the same level. Secondly, looking at formulas that really reflect what's going on the ground in cities and towns. Recreating a local aid formula that would reflect things like the presence of nonprofits in the community, the number of road miles you have, the age of the housing stock, whether or not there's immigrants, workers in the community, what's your potential for new growth. Those kinds of things should be in a local aid formula. Restore the lottery funding. Give us some tools on the local level to control costs like health insurance. Give us some local option taxes like most states give their municipalities. We're having that conversation on the state level using this report, and in addition, the MMA is working to connect the dots between what happens with local aid and what happens with economic development in the cities and towns, because businesses choose to move to a city or town, not to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And how do we fund those cities and towns so they can appropriately offer services to those citizens and those new firms that move here?
And I'm going to embellish that a little bit because I think that's exactly the right direction to go in. And I want to say something that happened.
Thank you.
Yes. I don't do that often, but we'll get.
That's why I take them when I get them.
In other states, as an example, I did work in Iowa. Iowa as a state government doesn't necessarily increase the amount of state tax dollars that flow back to municipalities, but it helps set up investment funds. So if a municipality like Northampton wanted to build or work with some companies to have an incubator space, such as we're trying to do in Hospital Hill, the state government would step in and be an investment partner with businesses. That's a kind of a creative role that is not necessarily a tax-based role. So I think it's part of what I would like to see more, and we're trying to do this through the Plan for Progress in the Pioneer Valley, Western Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts Rural Development Council, is try to have the state play a more creative role in being a net producer of revenues for municipalities and not necessarily being the place that we go to for additional tax money. I mean, it's interesting that when we rely on funding from the state or the federal government, it's still tax dollars that it just came from a different shell, but it still ultimately came from you as the taxpayer. But if the government can play a more creative role and engage as an investor type partner, then money gets generated, that wealth gets captured in the community, and it's better spent at the local level.
I have a question for both candidates, and it's about jobs for youth. I think, I'm not a youth anymore, but I would assume, that there's a lot of frustration, especially in the summer months, for youth to try to get jobs. And I'd like to hear some ideas, creative, novel ideas on either partnering with local businesses or getting grants from industry, or maybe even monies from the state or the feds for working on public projects so that there's not this level of frustration that they have something to do.
I'll start with a couple of different things. One, I know that we were successful through the Chamber of Commerce in trying to establish greater relationships between schools and businesses in setting up internships, and that seemed to open up a lot of doors for jobs, so that high school students could find jobs during the summer with some of the placements that they were making, or at least interviewing for, through the internship program. It's an education process to educate businesses to the role that youth can play in their businesses, and I think that that's part of our job here, is to help a business learn how it can benefit by employing younger people. Now, some people get that. Some businesses get that really well, and they're really interested in hiring high school students. I know that Cole Morgan has even had a program where it would hire high school students as interns, help pay their costs, defray some of their costs for college, with the expectation that person, upon graduation, would come back as an employee. So as they get to see that there's and it's both an incentive and a mechanism in place to make that work, I think we'd find more businesses stepping forward and being helpful. It's for me, from what I've seen in the education committee of the chamber, it was really a constant role of getting businesses and the school system and youth to talk to each other and understand how each can benefit through that collaboration.
That's it. I think the Chamber has done a very good job at trying to match up youth when they can. The biggest source of funding that we had for jobs for youth was through the Youth Employment Program that was run out of the Hampshire Franklin Employment Training Consortium, and those funds have been drastically cut, along with lots of other employment and training money as the recession hit. We talked about partnering with them for a local program with the Chamber. It became very difficult to figure out how to do that. Other communities, other larger cities, for instance Boston and so on, had very large employers that they could approach to actually donate money to run a youth program. We don't have large for-profit employers, we have pretty large non-profit employers, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. It's a tough question. The city actually is probably one of the largest employers of youth through our recreation department. And when you think about summer jobs, we probably employ, as a single employer, probably more than any other employer in the city. It's a good question. I think that it's something we need to think more about. And I think it's going to be harder than just partnering with the local businesses. Although I'm a little bit more optimistic now because we're coming out of a recession. For the last 4 years, business has been struggling. Our economy for our smaller businesses is mostly dependent on discretionary dollar, and as people at UMass, for instance, didn't get pay raises for 3 years and didn't have as much money, or 4 years or whatever it was, didn't have as much money in their pocket, businesses downtown somewhat suffered. So I think as times change, we may be able to pick up some more jobs. But it's a tough question. I think it's a good one.
They just, he asked the question.
Ask the question.
Go ahead.
There's a movement both in the high school and at Smith to make those schools sweat-free, which means that the purchasing policies are that they don't purchase from companies that use factories that don't meet fair labor standards. And at the high school, one of the group's goals is, after working to make the high school sweat-free, to try to bring that to the city. What do you think about that idea, and what would you do to help that process along? And I guess it's for...
Does it come to me?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about it more. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. I have read a little bit about what you're doing. I think that you're embodying how political change happens, which is that it happens with each and every one of us making decisions about how we spend our money or where we spend our time, and that we then take that out into the community and try to make that a broader policy. So I'd love to sit down and talk about how we would do that and what that would mean for the city. And I'd be curious about what kind of research you've done in the school department to see where the money is spent and how much of that, what are the effects in the school department? What kinds of changes do you need to make in order to change those purchasing policies? But I would love to sit down and talk further about that. I think it's a good idea. I was happy to see the other day, and it's not quite on point, but I'll just put it out, that Walmart has now planning on increasing how much money they pay for people's health insurance, because there was a movement in this country saying, hey, wait a minute, you're not spending enough to help your people buy health insurance. So that kind of movement, which I know your group was supported, has actually made a change in that company's policy. So again, I'd love to sit down and have that conversation and see what that means on the ground for the city and for the school department.
Socially responsible businesses has been a theme, I think, for the past, most of my life, I will say, at least since I was in college, and in fact influencing purchasing and investment is part of what changed apartheid in South Africa and brought down that regime. And if you remember, in our area, students demonstrating against the trustees at Amherst College to take their investment funds out of particularly destructive companies that had invested in South Africa. So I think it's an exciting time to be able to be doing that and making that influence. And I too would like to see how more we can all contribute to that. I participate in a number of organizations. For example, I'm involved in an organization called E2M, and the purpose of that organization is in fact to further the ambition of local businesses and local entrepreneurs and starting businesses to put a percentage of their profit right back into the community for community benefit. So it's a very direct flow of money back to the community. And among the standards to be an E2M company would be those standards, that you don't employ people overseas in sweatshops, and you don't pay below wage level and living level. So you tell us how we can play an effective role. Now, if we're going to have another question, I do have to say one thing. Sitting right over here to our left is the sound equipment and fans. And I'm having trouble hearing some questions from the audience. It's really loud here, so
We'll do one more, how's
pump it
that?
up. Okay.
We'll do one more, and then the candidates get to wrap up with their closing. Who's got one more question? Come on. You got one more. Well, you were in line next, so.
Well, I would follow up, because I was going to ask a question that this gentleman kind of alluded to, but maybe we could be a little bit more specific. I've been involved with economic development in Northampton, Amherst, Hadley, and East Hampton. I'm no longer since the state funding, but I work for a for-profit company now. It's called Grease Car, and we are developing alternative fuel systems that allow us to transition from a petroleum-based energy infrastructure to a vegetable oil-based energy infrastructure. And we have inquiries from all over the world. We have inquiries from all over the country. We get 600 telephone calls and emails a day. And we also plan to form another organization to bring vegetable oil in from farmers who are farming millions of acres of a particular vegetable oil producing crop. Now, we would love to build an alternative industry in this community. And we hired 7 people in the past 3 months. We'll hire 50 to 100 over the next several years, but we're having trouble finding people to hire. And we're very much interested in the young folks, too, who are choosing not to go to college, and we don't want them to be disenfranchised. And we'll take some folks that are going to college as well. But where is the role in, or is there a role in government to work with a group like us who are socially responsible, who want to put money back into the community, who want to reach out to young people, and provide some hope for the future? Is there a role in government?
Did you hear the question? Because it's going to be a long one to repeat.
I heard it.
You want to have to repeat it.
And
Do I start this?
And I believe it's your turn to start. Right?
Okay. I know Michael Garjan, the person who asked that question, and I think I could hear him almost there. Great question in what government can do in furthering those kinds of economic directions. We're living in a very exciting time in this region for a number of reasons that go back to, I think it was Fred Contrada's question about what we'd like to see Northampton look like in 20 years. And one thing that I said was this enthusiasm and energy, and you're talking directly to the ingredient that helps create that. And that ingredient is this inventiveness and creativity in new entrepreneurs. One of the directions our new entrepreneurs is going in around the region is in alternative energy, R&D, solving problems with public transportation, mobility, access, heating, creating new jobs. So the role that government can play, local government can play, is the following. Partnering with other governments, other local governments, on a regional level to support that kind of industry, find ways to invest in it, find ways to grow it, find ways to be a home for it so it can flourish here, and work collaboratively with the education system to make sure that we are in fact providing the kind of education and skills for students, for young people to be able to qualify for the jobs that you're creating. So I think there are ways to integrate that kind of exciting entrepreneurship with creative mobilization of resources that the government can help foster, and working closely with the education system. So all kinds of things start to link up in that kind of a process.
Many of the things Rick talked about we are doing. So let's start with youth and youth who are not choosing to go to higher ed. If you've been up to Smith Voc, you know that we run a school that is really working with those students who want to then go into the workforce. Your kind of company may be one of the kinds of companies that Smith School works with in their co-op education program, where students actually work for sometimes their junior and senior year out in the field, right in the business. And then many of those students are then hired by those businesses and stay there. And many, many firms in this area have been started by Smith School graduates. So that's one place that we're already doing it, and we should be continuing to do that. We're constantly looking at Smith School's shops to see whether or not they meet the needs of today and the needs of tomorrow. Some shops there have been closed down, other shops have been open in order to meet those needs. We're working with businesses to help them to expand or to grow in our community, and the single biggest obstacle has been space. That's why I'm so excited that we've gotten these grants at the state hospital to start putting roads in so that we have room for people to expand there. We created the first tax increment financing policy in the city that's allowed a couple of businesses so far to really expand their businesses and to hire new people in those businesses. I don't know if it's necessarily government's job to pick directly the winners and losers in terms of business, in terms of direct investment, but I do think tax increment financing is a good way to help businesses. We've also been working regionally. My staff attend Plan for Progress meetings. I'm very active in the EDC, and we work collaboratively with other communities when there's a business that wants to come to the region but isn't necessarily able to come to each individual city or town, because I think all of us in the region and municipal government understands that we all benefit if jobs come to this region. So I think we're already doing a lot of those things, and as we come out of this recession, I think we're going to be more successful at working together because we realize the importance of doing that.
I think this is pretty good. We built it right up to almost 8 o'clock. We'll give you guys the opportunity. Milking's not the right phrase, I'm sorry. But now there's enough time for the closing remarks.
3 minutes for your closing remarks.
Rick goes first.
Thank you. I think there are 4 things in government that need to be addressed. One is to get things done on time and at cost. And one of the roles I will play in government is to make sure that, in fact, we don't delay things, that with our projects that are at our doorsteps, that are going to affect our future, we do them now, and we don't delay them. I'm still harping on that water treatment plant. I'm really concerned about the fact that it went through continual delay. The city found ways to extend the task that needed to get accomplished, and it's now going to cost us a huge amount of money. I'd like to see the city government play a stronger role in facilitating problem solving, bringing together resources, bringing together people like this audience, making sure that, in fact, we use the best and the brightest minds. All the people in this city have something to contribute to solving problems. I want to see the city be accountable for how it spends its money, where it gets its money, what its outcomes are, so that people can, at the end of the day, say, yes, I got something for that. There was a clear benefit, there was a clear outcome. I know what my tax money is doing. I know I have better access. I know I have safer streets. I know that there's a job down the line. There's better incomes. I can afford to live here. And lastly, we always need to be building for the future. And so I look back and I think of all the opportunities that we've had and all the advice that's been given to the city government over the past years. Do more economic development. Do more to create wealth and retain wealth in the community. Do more to be friendly to businesses so that in fact they're growing and prospering. And that's the other half of what we call affordability. If people have good jobs and good incomes, the city becomes more affordable. So we need to always be thinking about doing something today that's going to benefit tomorrow. And that will keep people coming back to the city, wanting to live here, and enjoying the prosperity that's here. So that to me means lots of different items, primarily good planning, integrated comprehensive planning, not crisis management, not being project-driven or event-driven, but being driven by a clear vision and a direction how to get from here to there. I hope you vote for me on November 8th if you're of voting age, and if you're not, tell your friends. Thank you.
Mary Claire?
I want to thank the Youth Commission again for their management of this debate, and I'd especially like to thank our moderator and our timekeeper who did a phenomenal job. That wasn't an easy job, so thank you for doing it. City government is a reflection of the citizens, and we're voted in by you, and you make a decision every 2 years who you want to represent you in this representative democracy we have here in the city. It's been my pleasure and my honor to serve in city government since 1994, first as a councilor and now as mayor. I've been the mayor now, as I said before, for 6 years, and really about 5 of them, or 4.5 of them, we were in a recession. So we've managed, despite that recession, I think, to hold on to many of the services that we think are important, but not all of them. Over the next term, I want to continue my work to bring resources back to the community from the state level in order to be able to restore those things that we see as important. We have some challenges ahead. We need to do a comprehensive plan to be able to make sure that we're using the resources we have as wisely as we possibly can, including the land, the beautiful land and environment that was given to us by the people who came before us. And we are going to pass on to the next generation. It's important to plan for that. We need to work towards closing the achievement gap in our schools and making sure that our students have everything that they need to have, and that means that we have to have a better partnership with the state. We need to do things like build, protect, and expand on our infrastructure, including a water treatment plant that we were going to get 2% loan money from the state for the construction of, and that is federally mandated to be constructed. So it's not that we particularly have a choice about it. And we have a significant amount of work in terms of other infrastructure, and I want to continue to work to create a budget that includes a capital planning process that meets the needs, again, of the future. So I have enjoyed thoroughly being the mayor of Northampton, and hope that you give me the opportunity to continue, because I have a lot more things that I'd like to work on, and I'd like to have your support in order to do so. Election day is November 8th. I don't think anybody will forget that, given the plethora of lawn signs that are all over the community, but none of them say November 8th, so we have to remind you. But I hope that I can have your vote on November 8th, and I, again, thank all of you for the opportunity to be the mayor.
I'm supposed to mention that the election is on November 8th. So if you're able to vote, go ahead and do that. I'd like to thank the panel of questioners and Mary Claire and Rick Feldman and the tech group, because without them we wouldn't have no. And Grace Fleming, the timer. Okay.